Kelly waltzed in that evening like she'd had the time of her life, her face flushed, her lipstick a little too smudged for my liking. I barely looked up, just sat on the couch, one hand holding an envelope, the other balancing my glass of whiskey. She froze when she saw me, that look on her face barely disguised a flicker of surprise, a hint of guilt, all gone in a second. Kelly was always quick on her feet, always good at covering her tracks. But this time she was trapped and she knew it. "Evening," I said, forcing a casual tone, though every muscle in my body was tense. She didn't answer at first, just set down her purse and gave me a strained smile. "Hi, you're home early." I handed her the envelope. "A little gift," I said, my voice so calm it even scared me. Her eyes narrowed as she took it, but she opened it anyway, peeling the edges slowly, as if she was half expecting it to explode. Inside were photos, clear, undeniable photos, her, cozied up with another man, practically glued to him, laughing, holding hands, her head leaning into his shoulder like he was everything she ever wanted. I'd hired a private investigator after that receipt I'd found a week earlier, and he'd gone above and beyond. As soon as she saw those pictures, her face went pale. I almost felt a sick satisfaction watching the color drain from her cheeks. "What is this, Brad?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "Don't resist it, darling, it'll go smoothly." She stumbled back, practically tripping over her own feet as she took a step away. "This isn't what it looks like." I raised an eyebrow, fighting the urge to laugh at her weak attempt. "Really? Because it looks like my wife has been sneaking around, making a damn fool out of me. Tell me, Kelly, what does it look like to you?" For once, she didn't have that rehearsed calm, that smug little grin she wore when she thought she could talk her way out of something. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, as if looking for backup, someone to pull her out of the deep end. "What? You need him to explain it for you?" I asked, nodding at the photos. Maybe I should call him myself, invite him over. We could have a nice chat, just the three of us." Her jaw tightened. "Don't you dare, Brad. It's not what you think. He's just a friend. A friend." I felt my temper flare, but I kept my cool, pushing down the urge to yell. "You always look at your friends like that? Or is he just special?" She opened her mouth to say something, probably another lie, but I cut her off. "Cut the crap, Kelly. I've got more than photos, hotel receipts, text messages. You thought you could hide it forever." She backed up again, her face twisting with anger now, like somehow I was the one to blame. "You're really gonna throw away 6 years over a few lousy pictures? You're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" I echoed, stunned. "You cheated on me, Kelly. Lied to my face. Made me think I was losing my mind while you were off, doing whatever it is you do with him." But she didn't flinch, didn't even blink. That was the moment I realized just how far gone she was. She wasn't sorry, wasn't even ashamed. She was angry because I'd caught her, because I'd shattered her little secret world. The room hung silent, thick with tension, and for a second, I thought she'd try to cry or plead or give me some excuse. Instead, she crossed her arms and glared at me, like I was the one who just betrayed her. "So what now, Brad? Are you gonna sit there with that smug look, acting like you've won something?" It was like she'd flipped a switch. All the sweetness, all the charm she usually had. It was gone. This was a side of Kelly I'd never seen. A side that didn't even try to pretend. The real her. "You want to know what now?" I stood up, slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Now you're going to start explaining. From the beginning. Who is he?" She rolled her eyes, that same old defiance back on her face. "Why should I tell you anything? So you can act like some kind of victim? I'm not going to stand here and play along with this." Her voice was sharp, cutting, no trace of the woman I thought I knew. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep calm. "Let me get this straight, Kelly. You lied to me for months. Go behind my back. Sneak around. And I'm not even owed an explanation." Her face twisted, annoyed, and she threw her arms up. "Fine. You want the truth? He's someone who actually listens to me. Someone who makes me feel alive. I wouldn't have had to do this if you hadn't been so predictable. Working late, always going through the motions. You left me alone in this marriage, Brad. I blinked, stunned. There it was, her grand excuse, and somehow it was all my fault. So, let me get this straight. You think cheating was your only option? Because I was working hard to provide for us? Don't twist my words. She snapped, her eyes flashing. If you hadn't checked out of this relationship months ago, maybe I wouldn't have felt the need to find something more. She looked at me like I was a stranger. You're a good provider, Brad, but that's all you've been for a long time. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. And what was I supposed to be? Kelly? A mind reader? I thought we were in this together. You couldn't have just talked to me? Communicated like people in a real marriage. She scoffed, turning away from me, arms crossed. You would have just turned it around, made me feel guilty for being unhappy. You always do that. A twisted sense of clarity washed over me then. A realization that this person standing in front of me wasn't who I thought I'd married. This was someone who'd been hiding in plain sight, only letting me see what she wanted me to see. And now that the mask had slipped, she wasn't even trying to hide it. Wow, I said, my voice low, holding back the disgust creeping up my throat. So that's it? You just outgrew us? Or maybe you outgrew having to pretend to give a damn. She shot me a glare, unflinching. Believe what you want, Brad, but I'm done pretending for you. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Her indifference, her audacity. She didn't care that she'd ripped apart everything we'd built, or that she'd turned me into a stranger in my own life. I felt something shift inside, a cold resolve taking root. All right, I said, my voice steady, like a promise. If you're done pretending, then so am I. Her eyes narrowed, but I didn't care anymore. The fight had left me, replaced by something colder, sharper. She thought she'd won somehow, that she'd broken me down. But she was about to find out exactly what happens when I stop playing nice. She didn't know what to make of me when I said that. For the first time, Kelly looked genuinely caught off guard. Maybe she expected me to throw a tantrum, to storm out and leave her the house, the bed, the life we'd built together, as if that's all she'd ever wanted. But no, she was about to see a different side of me. She couldn't see it yet, but I had a plan, and I was done giving her any advantage. All right, Kelly, you're done pretending, I'm done pretending. I repeated, letting it hang in the air just a second longer than she was comfortable with. You know what? Let's make this clean, no fights. Since you think I'm only good for paying the bills, I'll make sure you're taken care of. But I have one last thing for you. She scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder like it was a joke. Like I was a joke. And what's that supposed to mean? It means I don't want any more drama from you, Kelly. I took a slow step toward her, watching her every movement. I'm gonna set you up with what you want, the freedom you're dying for, the chance to be with him or whoever else you have lined up. Her brows knitted, the first sign of nerves starting to show in her eyes. You're serious? I nodded, keeping my gaze locked on hers, my face unreadable, dead serious. I'll even make it easy for you. We can draft up an agreement, sign it, go our separate ways like adults. I paused, pretending to think for a moment, then added, just one condition. She tensed, as though she just sensed the bait hiding in my words. What condition? I smiled, letting it stretch slowly. You agree to a divorce, no alimony. You walk away with what you came in with, and I do the same. We'll split the house sale if we need to, but you don't get a penny from me afterward. Your friend can take care of you, right? Her face shifted from surprise to rage. Are you out of your mind, Brad? You think I'd agree to that? I've been your wife for 6 years. You can't just throw me out like I'm some temporary girlfriend. I can and I will, or you can stay. You can have the lifestyle you're so miserable with, but only if you're alone in it. Because let's be clear, you're not going to play me anymore, Kelly. You're either free with nothing or you're here without him. It's your choice. For a moment, she just stood there, fists clenched, face twisted in a mask of anger and something else, maybe even fear. She hadn't counted on this, on me calling her bluff. And I watched it dawn on her that her little plan to squeeze every last cent out of me was coming up short. I can't believe you're trying to cheat me out of what I'm owed. She spat, like it was her last attempt at control. I shook my head, shrugging. Funny, Kelly, I was just about to say the same thing about you. But I'm being generous here. far more than you deserve. Take it or leave it, you've got 24 hours to think about it. After that, my lawyer has the final say. Her face contorted with fury, but I was done listening to her complaints, done caring about her reasons. She had crossed a line she couldn't come back from, and in that moment, I saw her for who she really was. A user, a manipulator, and worst of all, an unrepentant one. I turned my back on her, heading up the stairs to the guest room, leaving her with the silence and the reality of her choices. Because the truth was, by the end of those 24 hours, I was going to make her regret ever thinking she could get away with this. The next morning, I left the house without a word, leaving her with 24 hours to stew over her choices. And honestly, I didn't care if she was fuming, crying, or plotting her next move. I had things to do, preparations to make. This wasn't going to be some drawn-out legal mess where she could worm her way into my life again. I was done. First stop was my lawyer's office. I wanted everything set in stone, airtight, no loopholes she could exploit. My lawyer, Tom, was an old friend from college, someone who'd been through his own divorce a couple of years ago and knew the ropes. As I laid everything out for him, every text I'd found, every receipt, every lie she'd spun, I could see his expression turn from professional to deadly serious. He pulled up a file, skimmed through some legalese, then nodded, his lips curving into a grim smile. So, she doesn't get a dime if she agrees to your terms. And if she fights it, he asked, looking up over his glasses. If she fights it, she gets nothing, I said, feeling the satisfaction of those words settle in. I want it clear, Tom. No loopholes, no sympathy. She played her hand. Now she faces the cards. Tom nodded, making a few quick notes, then pushed the agreement across the table. With what she's done, any judge would rule in your favor. But if she tries to take this to court, she'll bleed money on lawyers and still walk out with crumbs. I signed, my pen pressing a little harder than I'd planned. But the feeling was like ripping off a bandage. No going back. I was all in. Next, I called a moving company to box up my things. I'd leave her with the house until the sale, but I wanted no traces of myself there anymore. No reminders of the life we built. It was freeing, honestly, to just watch it all come together, knowing I was steps away from a clean slate. By the time I got home, the clock was running out on her 24 hours. I walked in, and there she was, sitting at the dining room table, eyes puffy, coffee mug untouched in front of her. She glanced up at me, her expression a blend of defiance and desperation. "You really think this is fair, Brad?" She started, her voice softer this time, a hint of a plea. After everything we've been through, I dropped my keys on the counter and took a seat across from her, staring her down. "I think it's the fairest thing I've done in this whole marriage, Kelly." She flinched, almost like she was hurt, but I wasn't buying it, not this time. "So that's it? You're just done?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "I gave you a choice. You can walk away or you can drag this into court and lose even more. You've got—" I checked my watch, letting the silence hang. 2 hours left to decide. She went silent, her fingers twisting around each other as she stared down at the table, struggling to come up with one last excuse. Some last plea that might pull me back in. Finally, she looked up, her eyes sharper, a glint of something that almost looked like acceptance. "Fine," she spat, "I'll sign it. But don't think for a second that this is over, Brad. I'll be fine without you, better even." I almost laughed, but I held it back, just nodding. "Good, because I'm done with this whole circus." She grabbed the pen I'd left on the table and signed the papers, her hand shaking just enough for me to notice. She didn't look at me when she finished, just slammed the pen down and stood up, brushing past me with a finality that felt like a victory. With that, it was over. All the lies, all the pretending. And as she walked out of the room, I realized something. I didn't feel any anger anymore. No regret. No sadness. Just relief. Because this time I knew she was gone for good. That should have been the end, a clean break. I was ready to walk away, let her go live the life she clearly thought she deserved, free from the responsibility she despised. But in true Kelly fashion, she wasn't about to let things end on my terms. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of texts from unknown numbers. Friends, family, even colleagues were messaging me, all asking the same thing. Is it true? Are you and Kelly divorcing? It didn't take long to realize Kelly had been busy. She hadn't wasted a second. She'd already spun the story to make herself the victim, to make me look like the cold-hearted husband who tossed her out without warning. One message caught my eye, a text from my sister. I heard what she said, but this doesn't sound like you, Brad. Call me when you can. I could almost hear the disbelief in her words. My sister had always been suspicious of Kelly's charm, never fully bought into her act, and thank God for that. I dialed her number, barely giving her time to answer before launching into the full story. How I'd found out about Kelly's affair, how I'd given her a choice, how she'd been furious when I wouldn't let her manipulate me anymore. After a long pause, my sister sighed. Brad, she's telling people you've been neglecting her for years, that you left her without any explanation. She's even saying you tried to cut her off without a cent. I clenched my jaw, letting the anger simmer. Of course she'd stoop this low. I could almost picture her sitting on the couch with a fake tear in her eye, telling anyone who'd listen about her heartless husband. She was rewriting our history, twisting the knife even as she signed the papers. Thanks for letting me know, I said, keeping my voice steady. I got a plan, don't worry. She's not going to get away with this. The next few hours were a blur. I contacted Tom again, asking if there was any way to hold her accountable for slander if she kept spreading lies. He was cautious, saying it'd be hard to prove, but we could gather evidence. So that's exactly what I did. I called a few mutual friends, people who'd known us from the start, and one by one, they told me the same thing. Kelly had been calling everyone she could, feeding them a sob story about me abandoning her, how she was devastated and blindsided. Each one was surprised when I told them the truth. One of them even admitted, honestly, Brad, I never really trusted her, but it was hard not to believe her, the way she was carrying on. The final piece came later that evening. I received a forwarded email from one of my friends, an invitation from Kelly to some sort of support gathering she'd planned, where she would share her story and find strength with friends during this difficult time. I nearly laughed out loud at her audacity. That was it. If she wanted an audience, I'd give her one. And I knew exactly how to do it. With my phone in hand, I hit record and started speaking, giving a simple, straightforward account of everything. No tea tricks, no anger, just the facts. I explained how I'd discovered her lies, how I'd confronted her, and how, even after giving her a choice, she'd chosen betrayal over honesty. I kept it cool and professional, giving just enough detail to be credible without spilling every gory fact. Then I sent the video privately to a few key people, ones who would know how to pass it along without making it look like I was out for revenge. The response was almost immediate. Within an hour, people started messaging me again, this time with words of support, even apologies. I watched the narrative shift in real time, felt the satisfaction of knowing she couldn't keep up the act forever. And as I sat back, watching the truth unravel her little scheme, I felt a strange calm. She thought she could play me, rewrite our story in her favor. But now everyone would see her for who she truly was. And that was all the closure I needed. It didn't take long for the fallout to hit. Kelly's carefully crafted story, her support gathering, her fake tears. All of it crumbled as my video circulated among our friends and family. The texts that came in this time were different. Some were apologies, others just silent messages with a thumbs up, a simple acknowledgement that they'd finally seen the truth. But the best response of all came 2 days later, from someone I hadn't expected, her lover. I was at work when I saw the email. The subject line simply read, "We need to talk." I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam or some last-ditch attempt by Kelly to twist the knife. But something made me open it, and I'm glad I did. Turns out the guy, let's call him Travis, had seen my video. Somehow, through the grapevine or maybe from a mutual friend, it had landed in his inbox. His email was straightforward and surprisingly remorseful. He claimed he hadn't known the full story, hadn't realized that Kelly was married to, in his words, someone who genuinely cared. Apparently, she'd fed him a whole line about me being distant, cold, practically shoving her out of the marriage. He apologized, saying that if he'd known the truth, he would have never gotten involved with her. He closed with, "I'm breaking it off with her. I don't want to be a part of this mess she's created." I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. Kelly had lost not only her marriage but her lover as well. Her whole plan, her entire attempt at rewriting the narrative, was collapsing piece by piece, and she had no one to blame but herself. I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a quick note, "Add this to the file." I wanted every ounce of proof of her lies and manipulations in case she tried to pull some stunt in court. Tom replied almost instantly with a simple, noted, "This is gold." The rest of the day was surprisingly peaceful. Knowing that her lover had turned his back on her felt like the final nail in the coffin. She'd burned every bridge she'd ever built, and she had no idea that I was the one stacking the wood and lighting the matches. But the real satisfaction came that evening when Kelly called me. I didn't pick up at first, just watched my phone vibrate, her name flashing on the screen over and over. Eventually, I gave in, curiosity getting the best of me. "Hello," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. There was silence on the other end, a shaky breath, then her voice, hollow and worn. "Brad, we need to talk." I smirked, keeping my tone icy, "About what Kelly thought you were done pretending." Her breath caught, and she stumbled over her words, trying to piece together something coherent. I saw the video. Why would you do that? Do you realize what you've done?" I almost laughed at her choice of words. "What I've done, Kelly? I only did what you wouldn't. I told the truth." Her voice cracked, laced with a mix of anger and desperation. "Now everyone's turning against me, Brad. People I thought were my friends, they're all blocking me, treating me like some kind of monster. That's because they finally know who you are," I replied calmly. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you started lying to everyone." She took a shuddering breath, then tried a different tactic. "Brad, please, we don't have to end things like this. I know I made mistakes, but we have history, 6 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I stayed silent, letting her words hang there, waiting for her to realize that the history she was clinging to was nothing but ashes now. Finally, I answered, "History doesn't mean anything when it's built on lies. We're done, Kelly. You made your choices. Now you live with them." There was a long silence, the weight of it pressing between us. I could feel her grasping for something, some last thread of control, some way to spin the story one more time. But she had nothing left. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, "I didn't think you'd ever stand up to me like this." I chuckled low and bitter. "Maybe that's the real problem, Kelly. You never actually knew me at all." With that, I hung up, knowing it was truly over. She could try to rebuild, but I knew that everyone around her had seen the truth. She'd spent years playing the victim, the master manipulator, but now the mask was gone, and there was no one left to fool. After our call, I assumed Kelly would fade quietly into her new life, her damage control tactics exhausted. But I should have known she wouldn't go down that easily. A week later, I received a message from a close friend. "Dude, have you seen her latest post?" I had no idea what he was talking about, so I clicked the link he sent, which led to her public social media page. She'd posted a long, dramatic message, complete with an artfully disheveled selfie of herself looking forlorn. The caption read, "When the person you trusted most in the world turns on you, leaving you stranded and heartbroken, it's hard to know who you are anymore. I thought we were building a life, but some people just don't know how to stay when things get tough." It was a bizarre twist of reality, like she was a Hollywood actress crafting a performance for sympathy. The post was full of cryptic accusations and subtle jabs at me, but not enough for anyone new to the story to fully understand. The comments, however, painted a very different picture. Friends and family who'd seen the video started calling her out right there in the thread. "Kelly, you seriously cheated and tried to blame Brad. This is next level. I knew something was off about this heartbreak. Turns out it was all you. Take responsibility, Kelly. You played with fire and got burned." Each comment felt like a victory lap, confirmation that her charade was officially dead. But she didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down. She went on a spree of posting more inspirational quotes about finding strength in betrayal, clearly trying to reframe the narrative as some grand story of personal redemption. Then, she tried contacting me again, leaving voicemails full of accusations, asking me how I could be so heartless, saying things like, "I thought you cared about me once," and, "Don't you feel even a little bit responsible for how things turned out?" I ignored each message, letting her words sit unheard in my inbox, knowing any response would just feed her desperation. Days later, I ran into a mutual friend, Sophie, who had a reputation for being blunt. She didn't waste any time getting to the point. "I bumped into Kelly yesterday. Well, I've never seen her like that, Brad. She's unraveling." Went on this whole rant about how she's being haunted by what she did, like she's some kind of victim of her own mistakes. I shrugged, unsurprised. She wanted sympathy. Guess she didn't realize you have to actually earn that. Sophie let out a dry laugh. And here I thought she'd just disappear and leave us all alone. But nope. I think she's getting desperate for attention now that no one's buying her act. Turned out Sophie was right. Kelly's posts became more frantic, her attempts to salvage her image more transparent. Each post was met with fewer likes, more side eyes. People weren't buying her story anymore. And with no allies left, she was stuck in the house that had once been ours, trying to spin a new tale while her audience dwindled. A few days later, Sophie texted me one last update. "Kelly's moving out. Saw her packing her car earlier. Guess the support gathering didn't help her after all." I read the text, took a deep breath, and realized I finally felt free. The storm she'd tried to create had blown over, leaving her with the ashes of her own destruction. And all I felt was peace. The house was eerily quiet after she left, like it had been holding its breath this whole time, waiting for her chaos to finally exit. I walked through each room, noticing how much lighter everything felt, even the air. Her things were gone, and with them, every last reminder of her carefully constructed lies. It was the first time I felt like the place was truly mine. I could finally see the house not as a battlefield of our past, but as a clean slate. A few days after she moved out, I sat down with a coffee in the empty living room and took a look through my messages. Friends I hadn't heard from in ages had reached out, all with the same sentiment. Relief that I'd finally seen her for who she really was, respect for the way I'd handled everything. Even people who'd initially been skeptical or on the fence about the whole situation had come around. One message stood out, though. It was from Kelly's former best friend, Jessica. She'd cut ties with Kelly a while back, but I hadn't known the full story until she sent me a lengthy message. "Hey Brad, I don't know if you remember, but Kelly and I stopped being friends a few years ago. She's always had a habit of bending the truth even back then. She pulled a similar act with me, twisting the story to make me look like the bad guy. I tried warning you once, but she convinced me I was overreacting. I'm glad you're free now. People like her don't change." Reading Jessica's message was like finding the final puzzle piece. I'd spent so long questioning if I could have done something differently, if I was somehow at fault, but Jessica's words made it clear. This was who Kelly had always been, hiding behind whatever mask served her best at the time. And that mask had finally shattered. A few nights later, I decided to mark the end of this chapter in my own way. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, sat out on the back porch, and watched the sun dip below the trees. The silence felt good, grounding, and with each passing moment, I could feel the weight lifting. I picked up my phone and, after a moment's hesitation, typed out a final message to her. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but simply because I knew she'd never get the last word again. "Kelly, I hope one day you learn that real connections can't be built on lies. I hope you find what you're looking for, whatever that is, but don't ever mistake my silence for forgiveness. I'm done with you." I hit send and blocked her number, knowing I'd never hear from her again. And as I sat back, feeling the weight of everything finally leave me, I realized that I'd won. Not through revenge, but by reclaiming my life. As the last bit of sunlight disappeared, I raised my glass in a silent toast to new beginnings and to the peace that comes when the past is finally laid to rest. After sending that final message, something inside me settled. It was like closing the door on a room I'd been locked in for far too long. The next morning, I woke up with a strange, unfamiliar feeling: freedom. True freedom, the The kind that comes when you've let go of every shred of anger and resentment, when you're finally ready to move forward without looking back. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into a new routine, slowly building a life that was mine alone. I started working out regularly, reconnecting with old friends, diving into hobbies I'd let slip over the years.